So today we're going to talk, this time, we're going to talk about how administrators can use data or data, however you choose to say it. I'll probably say it both ways, to support their music programs. And, this is something that we're not really used to as musicians. As administrators in the arts, we're not really used to a lot of data, or haven't been, but it's gotten to the point where we have to. That's what upper level administrators want. And so we just got to get in there, dig in there, and learn about it. And, it's not that schools and districts don't have data. We're not lacking it. We just don't really know what to do with it when we get it. How we can use it to improve student learning and to make teachers' jobs easier, to be honest with you, and to make them more successful. If you don't know what the kids don't know, how are you going to teach them, right? So that's just one piece of data that we're going to talk about, though. So, basically, it's factual information. Could be statistics, measurements, used for discussion or calculation. I've even seen a definition that says it's used to argue your point. I try not to use that terminology because I don't think you ever want to get into an argument with upper administration, but certainly use it to your advantage. I've always loved this, Edward Deming. Without data, you're just another person with an opinion, right? And then a follow-up. If we have data, let's use it. Let's look at it. But if we have our opinions, sure, let's go with mine. And, maybe back in the day, we could have said to our school board or to our upper level administrators, to our principals, whoever we report to, we could have used any one of these phrases and said, as far as I'm concerned, I really think we could use new uniforms. Or from my perspective, I think, having these new shiny sousaphones would be a good thing. You just can't say that anymore. Maybe you never could. But if you're trying to use opinions to get your point across, they're probably not going to be listened to as closely as the actual data. So one of the things that I think you need to do is learn to speak the language of data. Sorry, just want to make sure I had that on right. And again, as musicians, we don't typically have to deal with that. So I've invited a couple of my good friends from Texas, Jim Drew, who is the director of fine arts in Fort Bend ISD, and Joe Clark, who is the director of performing and visual arts in Spring ISD, to join me to have a little fun. Hey, Jim, turn your camera on. There you go. Can we do a quick sound check? Can we hear both of you?
Hey, Rick.
I feel like I've been brought up on stage in front of everybody.
Good job. I told them earlier that I was doing this because they're my friends now, anyway.
That's over, Rick. That's just it.
Maybe not even. So this should be pretty painless, but we all should have a basic working knowledge of some of the data terms that are being thrown around right now. You don't have to be an expert. It would be great if you could be, but at least recognize them. So we're going to play just a little game, sort of like the old $100,000 pyramid. And one person's going to give the description of what the word is, and the other person's going to have to try to guess what that is. So whoever's guessing, you need to turn away from the screen so you don't see what word is being shown.
This is a high-tech game, Rick.
It is a high-tech game. That's right. Okay, so Jim's going to turn around. Oh, the glare. Oh, I shouldn't have said that. Yeah. No, I'm talking about me, Jim. I'm talking about me. There we go.
This is
okay.
The friend thing.
All right, Joe. So here we go. You can always pass if you need to. I'm not going to give you forever on each one of these. So here's the first word.
District-wide. You got to fill in the last part. It's the formative or summative.
Assessment.
There you go.
Good.
We need to go out to the community and blank the people.
Survey?
Yeah.
Wow.
We know what we really need here is just absolute, not facts and figures, but we need this kind of.
Descriptive?
What'd you say?
Descriptive data?
Almost, not descriptive, but more primal.
Anecdotal?
Primal. Medium rare or
Prime?
the temperature is just like knock the horns off, put it on the plate. Pass.
Well done.
That'd be the pass. This is teaks. What are the teaks for Texas? These are what we base all the assessments on.
Standards?
There you go. We need to come back and review. Another term for a review.
Reassess?
Really take a look. Let's pass. Let's do another one.
Okay.
District-wide, where we keep our inventory is a big, huge
Database?
All right. Turn around, Jim. Thanks. Pretty good. So
go back to the other one, the prime rib.
The prime rib. Yeah, it definitely wasn't well done, but it was raw data.
Yeah,
Raw data.
Yeah. So raw data is just that kind of thing. Okay, now we're going to do this. Yes, thanks, Carol. Such entertainment. We figured we'd try to have to make something a little bit more fun. Thank you, my good friends. See, that wasn't so bad. See you later. Thanks for participating. Okay, so everybody, go ahead and jot down or just in your head, what do you think is the process of digging deeper into a set of data? Now, again, these aren't wild out there terms. These are pretty common terms that are used in education, and we're going to do the definitions or the results in a second. So the process of digging deeper into a set of data to see what's in there. What's the word that we use to describe the relationship between two different pieces of data? What is a piece of data that is very different from other similar pieces of data that you're looking at? What is it called when we break down data into smaller parts, but then we group it for comparison purposes? So there's two part, analyzing might be just breaking it down into smaller parts, but this is actually going to group it for comparison purposes. What's the word that we use for that? And then what's the scoring guide used to determine a student's performance? Okay, let's see how good you did. So the process of digging deeper into a set of data is drill down. Notice how I got that to drill down? Yeah, we're going to drill down into the data to dig deeper. What is the relationship between different pieces of data? And that's the correlation. So when we look at, we said, does one impact the other? What's the relationship there, right? What's a piece of data that is very different from other similar pieces of data? So you've got all these numbers and one is just way out in left field. That is called an outlier, right? And typically an outlier you wouldn't even consider if it was that far out. Sort of like when two judges give first divisions and one gives a 5, that kind of thing. What is it to break down data into smaller parts and group it for comparison purposes? This is a little bit, I guess, more advanced term, but it's called disaggregate, right? So we're breaking it down into smaller parts and we're grouping it. And then a scoring guide to determine a student's performance. I bet many of you got this, and that's a rubric, right? So again, how many got them all right? If you got them all right, give me a thumbs up or something in the chat. So yeah, just as long as you are aware of these terms and that you recognize them and that you can speak a little bit of the language of data. Um, Also, you can get more involved in this with upper administration. Encourage your directors, if you're administrators, encourage your directors to speak this kind of language too, because I think it'll resonate well with a lot of them. So many years ago, probably maybe 15, 12, 15, I got asked by my associate superintendent to do a board presentation, and she said it had to be data driven. And I was like, huh? Because as I said, we don't typically use data in fine arts. And so I said, we don't really have data. What do you want me to do? Go into everybody's rooms and count their trophies and medals? And she said, this is the superintendent said it has to be data driven, so you're gonna have to figure something out. So I did go downstairs to the guy who runs all of our numbers for the district, and I said, you've got to help me do this. And we came up with a couple of different things. But if you're going to do a presentation with data, you really do need to decide because of equity or even existence, right? I just read an article that said there was a school district in Massachusetts that literally just canceled all music, PE, and arts classes for next year. Those teachers have been riffed, right? And so do we need data that supports this is why we need to be here? I apologize to Bob Morrison because I'm paraphrasing here, but I in one of the presentations he did, not at CSI, but another one that I listened to, it was that MFA one that I mentioned earlier. He said that, data right now in our current programs is going to be critical going forward to share how COVID-19 is impacting your program. And so we really need to start looking at those numbers so we can present them to whoever is making these decisions about what we're doing. So when I was asked to do this board presentation, I'm like, gee, what does data look like in the music program? And so we know that data looks like numbers, right? This is my interpretation, maybe not an official interpretation, but I think it plays well. I think it's also factual information. It doesn't necessarily need to be numbers, but factual information that maybe the people that you're presenting to don't know, right? Research findings as well, something that's that can be quantified, and then I believe stories. Tell your stories because those are pieces of data that really play well to people. And I think Lori Shell the other day in her presentation, she talked about using data and stories together to state your point. It's interesting that a lot of the presentations, nobody coordinates theirs with anybody else, but I see a lot of interweaving of presentations. So, there's that published data that somebody else has gone out there and done as far as a dissertation or some type of study. There's that published. The research stuff is maybe the stuff you do on your own. And that's what I'm going to show you, I think, is the most powerful. And that anecdotal stuff is more the stories. The things don't really have to do with numbers. So you have to do some data mining. And you've got to get out there and there's tons of places to find it. As that one of those first slides said, it's not that school districts have a lack of the data. We just need to figure out where it is and what we can do with it, right? So when you see this background, this is the actual presentation that I did, and I didn't redo it for these purposes. I really wanted you to see what I was dealing with back 10, 12 years ago, even with, no, more than 10, with technology. And so this is what I needed to show my school board, and I had to do a preview for my superintendent prior to this, prior to the school board. So I said what he wanted me to say and didn't say what he didn't want me to say, right? So I said, hey, we're going to talk about all the arts because I was the fine arts director, not just a music supervisor. And so I just showed them, okay, a lot of times they don't know this. I said, in our elementary schools, we have art and music, and each teacher serves all the students in the school. And I made a really big deal out of it, right? Because at that time, our elementaries were really big. We had 1,200 kids in some of our elementaries. And I wanted the board to know that that one music teacher was having to grade and do behavior and teach 1,200 kids when the math teacher maybe only had to teach 75 or 80 or whatever the situation was. Then I got a little calculating here. 18 schools have 1 art and 1 music. 1 school has 2 music and 1 art. And then this last one was the important one. 1 school has 2 music and no art teachers. So what do you think the first question was that I was asked by a board member? Mr. Ghinelli, which school doesn't have an art teacher and why? Now, I was not trying to throw the principal under the bus because it was a principal's decision to whether they were going to have art and music or if the teachers were going to do it. And again, this was back years ago. And I said, well, the principal decided to have an extra language arts teacher and no art teacher at that school. Guess what happened the next year? We got an art teacher. And the principal was a little ticked off, but understood. That's not what I was trying to do, not directly, but it did solve a problem. I also told them what the federal law says. I'm going to digress here just for a second. When Bob Morrison talked about working with your school board, somebody in the chat said, I think sometimes upper administration doesn't give the school board all the facts of a situation, and the school board acts on whatever facts that they are given. And I totally agreed with that. And so sometimes, the board members don't live this every single day. Maybe they don't maybe they're not privy or they don't ask for to all this information as it changes. But I wanted them to make sure that, the federal law back then said that the core academic subjects does include the arts. And they also wanted them to know that because of this, the arts may be eligible to receive federal funds. Because how many times as arts people have we heard, oh, that doesn't apply to you. That just applies to our academic people. No, it does not. Now, fortunately, we have ESSA now, which gives more teeth, right? But we really had it back then. They were just trying to hide it a little bit. Yeah, and it is. David, thanks. Yeah, unfortunately, it is a reality. Oops, I went too far. So again, this was in Texas, obviously, because that's where I'm from. So I made sure that they knew that we were the required curriculum. And even though it's not highlighted, kids in Texas had to get 1 credit in fine arts in order to graduate. So I just needed to make sure they understood what everybody was being told. Very quickly, I showed them this. This is a document that was written years ago, but I think it's very understandable, and many of you have seen me do this, but very understandable for the non-music person or non-arts person, and that's the arts reach students who are not otherwise being reached. So we know that we have kids that aren't going to be good athletes and aren't going to be good scholars, but we know that they can be really good musicians. I know of a student who was a multiple all-state student, but could not pass that state test in order to graduate. Took it multiple times, finally did, but that just wasn't her thing, but a marvelous music student. The arts reach students in ways that they're not otherwise being reached. So those of you that are old enough will know that back years ago, there was that buzz about, are we reaching kids kinesthetically, orally, multiple intelligences? And boy, where better than in arts, and especially music, playing an instrument, do kids engage in all of those things at the same time? This is a given. I think probably why a lot of us do what we do, because it makes for really great groups of people to be together. Transforms the environment for learning. I mean, think about your rehearsal space. A stage or your room, it looks really different than the typical math room or social studies room, right? And then those kids who are already successful athletes and are already successful scholars put a violin in their hand, put a pair of drumsticks or an oboe, and all of a sudden they have a different challenge on their hand that they might not be just as good at, and provides that additional work for them. Of course, you probably all have heard Eric Jensen and how the arts as a brain developer. And I remember when I became a principal, the first thing I did was go to a week-long workshop with Eric Jensen about how to transform learning to impact brain development. And so it's really great information. And I think this is data. I think this is data that is not numbers, but shows how important and how impactful what we do is for kids. So back away from the original presentation and here. So here are the things that I've witnessed over the years of what really resonates with school boards and administrations. They want to see what are the recruitment and retention numbers. Are you losing kids out of your program? Are you gaining kids? What do your assets look like? And we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail. What is your budget like? And then also the academic results and behavior of music students, and that's the big advocacy piece. So I just brought up this information, and again, it's dated but it was current back then. And I got this from the Texas Education Agency, so you're going to have to pick up whatever your state does, whatever information they provide. This was the campus academic excellence indicator system. So if you scored a certain level on your statewide test, then you were ranked either exemplary recognized, acceptable, or low performing. And you can see in both 6 through 8 and 9 through 12 campuses, campuses with a higher enrollment of fine arts did better, right? And so these numbers show that. And then I just showed them what our schools were doing. And I think when we start doing, the numbers from our districts or our schools, it really resonates much deeper than if you show them somebody else's results. So we just looked at a couple of different things here, and we were looking for the big outliers. And in this case, we weren't ignoring the outlier, but we were comparing it to other things. And we were asking, why are things so different between these two schools? Is it the teacher? Is it the administration? Is it recruiting? What's going on here? And so we just showed percentages, and in some cases, this Decaney High School, you would say that maybe these are outliers, but that was a brand new school, so we were just opening up those programs, and so that's why those numbers are so different. However, every student had to take a fine arts credit, and a lot of them took visual arts, so that's why those art numbers are so high there. Okay. And then we just looked at middle school participation, and again, looked at outliers. Okay, we've got 348 in choir there. That, whoops, sorry, too quick of a click. And that was by far higher than everybody else. And so my question is, why is that, right? That teacher was an absolute Pied Piper. Kids were crawling in that choir class. She was all by herself, which you'll see later, some data that we pulled, right, to help get some more numbers, but we had to start somewhere with this. Then I just found all that other published information. This is our Texas All-State Musicians, which shows basically that kids over the course of time that were in the All-State groups scored higher on the SAT scores than kids that were not, right? And you don't even need to look at the numbers. You can just see the chart. We also looked at, and thank you, Frank Coachman and Texas Music Educators. I think Frank's on with us. He put a lot of this together way back then and still does. So we looked at the SAT scores, and we found that kids that were in the fine arts did better than kids without fine arts. And again, this is very impactful information. You don't know if these are your kids or not, right? So here's what we did. And I went to this guy and I said, help me do this. And let's just compare kids who've been in fine arts with kids who have not been in fine arts. And let's compare in several different areas. So that's what we did. The TAKS test was our state test at the time. Meeting the standard meant the kids had to achieve 80%, right? And again, I left it pretty archaic looking here. But what you can see without exception is that kids that were involved in the arts had a higher percentage of meeting the standard on the state test than kids that were not involved in the arts, right? Now, I did this for several years in a row, 2005. We also did commended, which meant that kids scored above the standard. So if the standard was 80, maybe commended was 90, and we showed the same thing. Kids that were involved in the arts had a higher percentage of commended. And we did that for several years, because again, you don't want it to pick one year and it just be a fluke that they did that. Like I used to say to my kids when they played a really hard passage correctly in the band, oh, that was good. Let's do that again. Make sure you just didn't do it by mistake, right? Let's make sure you really know how to do it. So we did this over time, and we saw the same thing. And then we looked at their grades and we said, let's just average their final grades, okay, for the whole year. And what we found is that kids that were involved in the arts had a higher percentage of A's and B's and a lower percentage of C's, D's, and F's. And as I click through, you can see for every year that we did that, it was the same thing. You know, the superintendent looked at me and he slid his glasses down on the end of his nose. And I said, yes, sir. And these are our students in our district right now. He was very impressed. And then we did this. And you can see all the years here on one slide. And the way that reads, we had about 30, probably 33,000 kids at the time. And the way this reads is, of all the discipline referrals in the district, 6 through 12, because kids selected their electives starting in 6th grade. So we did 6 through 12. So all kids in 6 through 12, all the discipline referrals, about 8% of them were committed by students that were in the arts, and about 92% were committed by students that were never involved in the arts. And so, Marquita, hopefully that answered your question. Yeah, we had kids in elementary school, like you saw, that already got art and music. So in 6th grade is when they actually chose to be in a fine arts course. So here's what happened. When the school board saw this, one of the board members said, well, it's obvious what we need to do. We need to have more kids involved in the arts. So if you can see the time frame here, 2005, 2006, 2007. So what happened in 2008? Okay, it was the recession. Budgets were being cut, jobs were being lost, programs were being cut, and like everybody else, we were asked to submit our budget cuts. So I did, as the fine arts director. My associate superintendent told me when the superintendent got to the fine arts folder after this presentation, he pushed it aside and said, we're not touching fine arts. That year, when everybody else was being cut, including athletics, I got a $200,000 increase in my budget so that we could make the arts more accessible to students who might not normally be able to do that, because they saw the benefit of our kids in our district and our situation and what that did for kids and what it does for the school and what it does for the school district, right? And yeah, even the athletic director made a comment that, yeah, he had to give up some of his money so I could get more. But that's what happened. Let me see, Robin, how would you respond if someone asked if the students who were scoring higher on state tests weren't scoring higher because they were in the arts, but instead were attracted to the arts because they were more academically inclined? Yeah, and I think there are other studies out there that shows the percentage of increase as kids progress through 1 year of the arts, 2 years of the arts, 3 years of the arts, and 4 years of the arts. And I probably need to add that in there because I do have those statistics. They're not right in front of me, but it shows that same increase. That so kids that are involved in the arts for a longer period of time do better, right? And you can always pick data apart like that. So you have to put those things together to best suit your needs. Here's the more anecdotal thing that I thought was very important to share with our board members, that our kids are succeeding on the local level at art shows and at theater performances and band and dance. And we're also excelling at the state level. Our bands are going to all state contests and marching in state events and meeting the governor of the state of Texas because they've done something. And also our national accomplishments. They need to know that. This is anecdote to me anyway. It's anecdotal data. I didn't, Janet, I didn't do attendance rates. That is really powerful because I did a presentation for the National School Board that actually did a hypothetical situation where if we took a program away of kids that normally come to school on a regular basis, what that would look like if we didn't get their ADA, and it was pretty eye-opening. It was because of the way attendance at that time was reported, and so yes, if you can do attendance, I would definitely do attendance. So yeah, don't be afraid to show this anecdotal data. I think it's very beneficial. This is what really was cool to me. These are all the former students from our district that came back and were currently fine arts teachers in our district, right? So cool, because what it told them is these kids need to be prepared for their career as an arts educator, right? Really irritates me to hear administrators say, oh, we've got to prepare kids to be scientists and engineers and doctors. We do, but we also need to prepare them to be arts educators or performers, right? That wouldn't be fair to them if that's what they succeed doing, right? So I ended it with where do we go from here? If you have the board in front of you, you might as well, tell them, hey, I need at least one art and one music teacher at each elementary. And I already showed you or told you that did happen. And then we also wanted to look for ways to make sure that schools that were struggling had plenty of funding to do what they need to do, which we got, and to continue to look for ways to make sure kids could stay in their arts classes for 4 years and not have to drop it to take some remedial something or other. So, okay. So, boy, I'm getting long-winded. I got to move quickly. I only have almost 15 minutes, 12 minutes. So you need to look at your enrollment and retention. These are just made up numbers, but you need to look at them like this, right? So yeah, if you look across sixth grade in that top example and saw, 125 in sixth grade that year, 128 in sixth grade the next year. Oh yeah, now let's look at them as they go through your course, right? They're in sixth grade, you started 125 kids. In seventh grade, you lost a whole bunch, and in eighth grade, you lost even more. You've only retained 36.8% of your kids. I don't think that's very good, right? Or, again, now you look there from 128 to 50, it's better. You did better with the next group, but still not where you want to be with retention. Here's much better from 125 to 95. And you do also need to look horizontally as well, because you want to know that you're increasing the number of kids that you're starting, right, in sixth grade, but also trying to keep more too. Really, really easy to do. Yes, Tyler, you'll get a copy of this presentation. Plus, all of this is being recorded, so you go back and see all that. Yeah. And again, these are just made up numbers. Please use real numbers when you do this. Okay. Okay. Some of you may know we have an instrument inventory program, and I'm not trying to sell it, because if anybody wants it, it's free. But I just want to give you you need an inventory of your assets to show your administrators what you have, and the fact that instruments, just like school buses and other capital outlay equipment, it doesn't last forever. Okay, these are not our numbers. We get these from the Texas Achievement Council and NAM, and it shows that on average, a high quality flute should last 15 years on average, right? Low quality, 3 years or maybe even less. So be careful what you're buying, that kind of thing too. We can help you with all this. There's also depreciation. What I know from being a campus administrator and a central office administrator is that once an item sees its useful life, take a copy machine. they're not going to spend hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dollars repairing copy machines over and over and over, or school buses over and over and over and over, if they're putting more money into it than the item is worth. And instruments depreciate, uniforms depreciate, pianos depreciate, just like every other capital expense. So it's our responsibility to make sure that we educate them that instruments are no different than all those other things that they're replacing on a regular basis. Sometimes all they see is the instrument. They see the sousaphone marching across the field, but they don't see the duct tape holding it together, right? Because as administrators or as educators, we make things last the best we can. Sometimes it's not a good thing. So, have a rubric. We talked about a rubric, and tell them, hey, I've used a rubric, and I've put my instruments in these situations. And just an example of what it can do for you is it shows when we purchased the instruments, they were worth $114,000, but now they're only worth $28,000. So you try to get them to understand, like, would you, if you have that old car that gets you to work, but it's got 150,000 miles on it, but it gets you to and from, doesn't look real great. And then, on the books, it's worth $500, but all of a sudden your air conditioner goes out, and now it's going to be $1,500 to get the air conditioning replaced. It doesn't make sense to spend $1,500 on something that's worth $500. That should be cause for concern. So you got to do that with instruments too. And again, not trying to sell you anything, because we give it to you for free. So if you're interested, we can help you with that. The other thing I would recommend that you do with that, to add some data to that, is do some forecasting. And again, these are just made up numbers, but look at, if you're responsible for a whole program, look at your feeder program. How many instruments are we starting at each grade level? Take an educated guess of how many you think you'll retain by the time they get to a certain grade. Look at your instrument conditions, and then you'll notice when you get to the end that, okay, on my baritones, 3 need to be repaired, 1 needs to be replaced, but I think I'm going to be gaining 2 along the way. So really my needs are, I've got -4 right now. So put both of those things together to present that data to why you need what you need. I need 1 for every kid, and I don't have enough for every kid, what I'm going to anticipate. I don't have enough working instruments right now, or uniforms, or whatever the case may be, right? So remember that choir director that had 300 and something kids, and there was only 1 director? Said, man, I've got to do something about this. So fortunately, in Texas, we have the Texas Music Administrators Conference, and we did a staffing survey. And I compared Richardson ISD, which is a fabulous district, has always been a fabulous district, and we were more closely associated with them as far as test scores, demographics, and even our music programs back then. And if you look at some of these things, you'll see that in Richardson, in band, they had 113 people and we had 2 people, but in spring, we had 305 people in our program and only 1. It's like, okay, how does that happen, right? Same thing here in Richardson, they had 60 to 1, but we have 295 to 1 in our district. And when our administrators saw that, they really, their eyebrows went up. And I know you can't really see this real well, but this is basically the staffing guideline that I gave them based on all those numbers. And I showed them that, look, here's the staff that we need in order to be where I think we should be with here's our current staffing guideline, here's what we need, and here's why we need it, because we're over by 109, we're over by 100, we're over by 176. And I made this just like an academic teacher. An academic teacher is responsible for 125 kids. So our first thing was, if you've got 0 to 124 in band, you get 1 teacher. If you get more than that, you get another teacher. And I also brought in the extracurriculars as far as having to take kids on field trips and to contests and stuff like that. We just can't have 1 teacher responsible for that. That was my rationale, and it worked pretty good because we ended up getting a lot of positions. Let's talk about disaggregating the data real quick. We didn't really do this with our fine arts data, but here's what I did that got us big brownie points, got me big brownie points, and it got the fine arts teachers brownie points. I brought in some testing people that tested with the academics, and we trained them on how to use the data software for the state standardized tests. I told the teachers that they needed to identify the students you teach, and then look for trends. What are you seeing? What do you see in kids that you teach in art or in band or in choir? What do you see them? Where are they not doing well consistently? And isolate those common concerns, get with the other teachers and confirm the proper methodology and terminology, and then reinforce in your class. And I want to tell you, my art teachers, my visual arts teacher said, oh my gosh, these kids don't know how to do measurement. We can absolutely teach them how to do that. So I said, that's great. So go to the math teachers and ask them how they, what terminology do they use to teach measurement. And if you don't think that goes a long way in the eyes of the administrators and the teachers, because there again, if you were in Gary's session, how do you build relationships with those teachers? Hey, I'm not going to be the math teacher, but I'm going to help you however I can in my class. And it didn't take a lot. Here's another thing I think we should all be doing or asking our directors to do is, ask them to track their students' accomplishments in data form. And it doesn't have to be anything fancy. It can be who can perform all of their scales, what kids played solo and ensemble, what percentage earned first division, second divisions. It's going to give you an idea. If you see that your kids everybody played a solo and everybody played a third division, made a third division, what's that going to tell you? Well, I either didn't prepare them correctly or I picked music that was too hard for them, right? So how is that impacting your teaching? And do they speak the language of data, and are they taking that data to their administrators and saying, here's what we're doing? So it doesn't mean constant testing, right? It just means continuous assessment, students just playing parts, showing what they can do. Charts and stickers work fine, right? Don't you know? Little kids, especially, they love seeing those charts with stickers on it. And if they've got 10 stickers and everybody else has got 2, that's pretty visible when somebody walks in the room, right? Always record rehearsals. I think that's critical. So just record results, analyze them later if you need to, but find a way to at least record the results. There are a lot of, I'm not associated with any of these folks, but there's a lot of data collection tools out there. You may know of more. So do whatever it is that you can. Just 2 quick stories before we're done. Racine Unified in Wisconsin, they hadn't purchased instruments since like 1963, if I remember correctly. So our Division of Education, especially Mike Campice, our managing director, he worked with them. They pulled the data together and they submitted it, and they got $1.3 million for new instruments. And the board told them, we didn't know you need that. Nobody ever told us. Something to that effect. Jeremy Earnhardt in Texas did a huge presentation on why data is effective for music education advocacy, and they passed a $600 million bond, a lot of it that's going to support the arts. So it takes a little digging, it takes a little work, but it's definitely doable. If I can do it, just find somebody that can. You organize it. If you're not great with the numbers, and let some people put those numbers together for you. Whew. Okay, we're down to the wire, and I see that a lot of you are chatting with each other, and that's awesome. That's great. If anybody has any questions, you're welcome, Janet. Like I've said earlier, we'll go back through the chat, and if for some reason we didn't answer the question along the way, if I didn't catch it, I'll definitely get back with you. We're trying to figure out our way, somehow that we're going to do all that. I'll tell you quickly, because if you're still there, a couple of people said, how do I engage my teachers to help with inventory? Lindsay said, I finally got my teachers to do inventory. You know what? I was in charge of their budget, so I held it over their head. I'm sorry I had to do it. Like Gary said, sometimes you can't be real nice about it. I said, look, budget, you get your new budget July 1st. I'll trade you an inventory for a budget. So it's important. It's important because what I can tell you about inventory, having been through issues, especially personally, my house was flooded in Harvey. We had to get a lot of things replaced. And what that insurance company is going to say is, if you don't have proof that you had it to begin with, they're not going to give you money for it. So, don't try to get 3 Leray English horns just because you think you can, because if you can't prove you had them before and you lost them, you won't get them again. So Yeah, thank you so much, everybody. Yeah, John, sometimes it's the carrot, sometimes it's the stick. I like that. So thanks a lot. Hope you can join us for the rest of the sessions. They're going to be great. We're going to get one started here quickly, and our skull session later tonight. So once again, thanks. Let me know how I can help. We'll be here for you.